Visit elmhurst.org to explore the new City of Elmhurst website. Find out the latest Elmhurst news, pay utility bills and parking tickets, report concerns, and much more. Elmhurst.org is an ideal way to discover what Elmhurst offers your business, your family, your life.
Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. Thank you for coming on such a beautiful morning. We really appreciate your attendance and support. My name is Kathy Jordan and I am the chairman of the Senior Commission here in the city. The Commission provides information, advice, and advocacy to enhance the quality for adults here in Elmhurst. We typically have 3 presentations during the course of the year, and we appreciate your support and look for winter. We will have several other conversations for you, so make sure you respond and attend. Before we start, I'd like to thank a few people, one, City Hall and our Mayor, Pete DeCiani, and Alderman for their support of the Senior Conversations, and our Commission. So, and I'd like to thank Jerry Koppel, who is, our community outreach person for Lexington Square, for our treats this morning. Let's give them a round of applause for that. And of course, you're only as good as the people you work with. I have some commissioners here. Downstairs is Jackie Haddad. She's our education chair who actually coordinates these presentations. Jerry Koppel is also on our education committee, and Heidi Forbush are here with me this morning. So I appreciate all of their help and for putting some of these presentations together. I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning, Rick Law. Rick L. Law is the lead attorney of Law Elder Law, which serves seniors and those who love them in the Chicago metropolitan area. Mr. Law is the founder of the Veterans Benefit Institute, which provides continuing legal education to attorneys. He has been a featured presenter at national conferences of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and at numerous professional and public seminars throughout Illinois. A graduate of Northern Illinois University College of Law, Mr. Law has focused his practice on elder law, which includes taxation, estate protection, disability, Medicaid, and VA benefits and guardianships. Please welcome our guest, Speaker Mr. Rick Law.
These days, I often am speaking to attorneys and they're saying, wow, you were really smart to figure out that we were all going to get older together and that the practice of law was going to change. And I said, frankly, I'm not that smart. What really happened was 11 years ago, I was in my office, and I'm a tax attorney as well as handle lots of investments and real estate work, and I get a call. And it's Louise, and that's her real name. And Louise says to me with panic in her voice, Rick, Bob's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What are we going to do? Am I going to lose my home? Are we going to lose everything? And I sat there for a moment and thought, I have no idea how to answer that question. I'm a tax lawyer. I get to wear white gloves and deal with the richest people in town, and they never call with that kind of a problem. But Louise was the church organist. She taught both of my girls to play piano. Her husband Bob was a Korean War veteran who became a policeman and then got his master's degree in criminal justice and taught at our local community college. And now in his 70s, had Alzheimer's. He taught both of my sons, the youngest who's here at Elmhurst College right now, to play chess. And so instead of doing what I would usually do, I'm sorry, I don't handle that particular area, I told her the truth. I don't know, but I'll find out. That was in the year 2000. And what I had to learn was I had to learn that in addition to tax, in addition to the things that I had done for my wealthier clients, I had to learn something about our health care system, which, as you all know, gets ever more complicated and problematic. And I learned then something about Medicare and what it covered and what it didn't cover. I learned then that more than half of our citizens, when they need long-term care, eventually need Medicaid. And so I began to work with Bob and Louise on helping them to make changes in their planning so that we would be able to answer the questions that were buried inside of Louise's questions. She said to me, "Rick, am I going to lose my home?" And for the women in the room, you know that you all think about your home differently than us guys, because she didn't say, "Are we going to lose our home?" She said, "Am I going to lose my home? Are we going to lose everything?" And the thing I also learned about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other things is that Bob was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the year 2000. The first time I ever began to grapple with those problems. I was 50 years old, and now I'm 61. And Bob died 6 months ago. So from the time of diagnosis, which, by the way, we all understand that the time of diagnosis isn't the beginning of the Alzheimer's or dementia, but from the time of diagnosis to the time of death was essentially 11 years. That's a long trajectory of time. And so Louise wanted to know, how are we going to find care for Bob? How am I going to protect my home, because I'm the healthy spouse? And how am I going to be able to retain enough of our assets so that I can actually stay in the neighborhood and not have to sell and move? So over the years, eventually at the end of 2004, I remember it was Bob and Louise called it in the year 2000, but in 2004, I actually began a firm that was just dedicated to those issues of dealing with my aging friends and family and others going through these big changes of life prior to passing away. And so one of the things that I found in 2007 is I wanted to create a way to explain the process better. And so I created there's a graphic behind me called the Elder Care Journey. And when you think about aging and health, think about the two together not necessarily being an age, but a condition. So on the far right of that chart, I decided I would call that particular age the healthy, vigorous senior. The healthy, vigorous senior, because it isn't necessarily an age, because these days, and again, I just mentioned to you that I'm 61. 7 years ago, when we first started focusing in this particular area, the only clients that came to see me were those who were essentially in their 70s and 80s, who to me represented my parents' generation. And now that I'm a little older, and the boomers got a little older, at least every week, I'm dealing with a boomer, too, who has young onset Alzheimer's, which means before 65, Parkinson's, and for those that have served in Vietnam, the issues related to Agent Orange contamination are everywhere. And so we're dealing with the boomer issues as well. But so healthy, vigorous isn't an age, it's a condition. Am I still able to do the things I love to do? I may be 65 and over, but I can get up in the morning, I can get myself dressed, I can go enjoy the things I love to do. That's the healthy, vigorous senior. How is their health care paid for? If you look down below the line, it says, well, Medicare cares about that kind of care, the kind of things that you need. You needed help because you had an asthma problem, or you needed help because you needed to have your gallbladder out, or as somebody said to me this morning, she had to have a stent put in because of the blockage of arteries. Those are the things that Medicare cares about. Medicare cares about care that you can get better. When you can get better and you're a senior, Medicare cares about your care only when you can get better, or there is one exception, if you're about to die within the next 6 months, it covers hospice. And so in addition to Medicare, you need to have a Medicare supplement, and for many of you, you also have insurance through an employer that you had in the past. And it covers medications and acute care health care problems. But you know, it used to be that people died quickly, but now they take a lot longer to pass away. And so if we don't die quickly in the healthy, vigorous senior stage by a sudden stroke or accident, we eventually get to the point where we start to have mental issues regarding memory or mobility. And then I call that stage the declining senior. And frankly, that was Bob's stage when he started. He now had memory issues, but he still was able to live at home. Eventually, as he went further in that particular stage, he needed to start to have in-home assistance. So if you look at that in-home assistance stage for the declining senior, Medicare continues to cover the same things it took care of before. Anything you can get well from, acute care, but it doesn't provide anyone coming to the home to help you with your memory issues and dealing with your checking account or fixing meals for you. Medicare doesn't care about that kind of care. And so now you start to pay out of your own pocket unless you have some sort of long-term care insurance, which very few people do. If you continue to live, and most people do, you may now need to move to what's called an assisted living facility. In the state of Illinois, there is a legal definition of assisted living, and that is if you need help with your activities of daily living, which are, this morning, you all got here. You all got here, including me. And you know what? We don't realize how much we should have a big smile on our face that when we woke up this morning, we actually got out of bed without anybody helping us. We actually, think about how basic, we got across the room to the bathroom without anybody helping us. We took care of our own needs. We then bathed. We then dressed. We then went and had something to eat. We got in the car. We got here. It's a miracle. But a day may come when you can't do those things without help. And if you need one person at a time to help you, and you move to a facility that's called assisted living, it's because you only need one person to help you. It's actually a licensing, one person to help you. And you know what? Medicare doesn't care about paying for your assisted living facility. Medicare doesn't care about that kind of care. It still cares for what it cared for before: medicines, doctor visits, acute care. If you continue to thrive, and frankly, 90% of the people who need in-home assistance and or assisted living assistance then need to go on to full skilled nursing care within, I'm sorry to say, 2 to 3 years. 90%. So if you're in assisted living, you can plan that 90% of you and me, we would go on to living in a full skilled care facility. That means it takes at least 2 people to take care of you during the day. I call that stage the fragile senior. There's no magic to this, but you see, Medicare definitely doesn't care about paying for your nursing home. And now, for most people in the state of Illinois, they get to the point that they run out of money. They run out of money. Because when you're paying $6,000 to $9,000 a month, you run out of money. And if you're even Bob, even if you had $2 million and you're living for 11 years, of which numerous years are in a long-term care facility, you run out of money. More than half of our citizens run out of money. And sooner or later, we all pass away. But one of the things that often happens, and this is something that's true of all of us in the room who are husband and wife. When we look at the first, I was speaking to one of you a little while ago, and I said, I've been married to my wife for 38 years. When you go through that first 38 to 40 years, if you start around 20 to 25, you can actually almost predict that you'll pretty much have the same health as you go along. But when you hit the 60s and you start to look forward as a husband and wife, you need to face the reality that your health care is going to diverge. Just like Bob and Louise, one healthy person is going to be looking at a less healthy spouse and going, how do I provide care? But when that non-healthy spouse passes away, that survivor still has to be thinking about care. And so really, when we're looking at this whole idea of elder law and elder care in addition to estate planning, we're thinking about this entire stretch of looking at a person's longevity and aging process and the diverging of health care, and how do we avoid excess impoverishment so that we can answer the question that Louise asked me 11 years ago, what are we going to do? Am I going to lose my home? Are we going to lose everything? And frankly, for those of you in the room, there's a recent survey being done, and the number one issue right now for us as seniors is, are we going to outlive our money? And is it going to, are we going to not outlive our money and have all of our money spent on health care costs? So this presentation, Elder Law Essentials, is going to take you quickly through this whole concept. And really, these are the same things that I teach attorneys when I do continuing legal education for the Illinois State Bar Association. So what is this whole idea of elder law? Or often I find that clients are now calling me an elder care lawyer. In a certain sense, it's estate planning on steroids, because you see, it's more than just a death and distribution plan. Because when Louise called me in 2000, I knew how to do great plans. If you just would quickly die for me, I could make sure everything worked just right. But I didn't know how to deal with pre-death. So in this arena, we're looking at survivor income, health care costs, and quite frankly, then inheritance. I call it, we have to think about income now, we think about inheritance later. Certainly you build it into the plan, but you're trying to provide for a husband and wife or a single person while they're alive. Because you see, Louise wanted to know, how are we going to get health care for Bob without unnecessary impoverishment? And unfortunately, our health care system for seniors is built on an impoverishment model. You have to be poor enough to eventually have governmental benefits for long-term care. And so we're constantly trying to deal with balancing the needs of the ill spouse and the healthy spouse. And the world has gotten much more difficult quite recently. For the last 18 months, well, 18 months ago, the state of Illinois proposed new rules relative to long-term care and assisted living facilities and nursing homes. It's called the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 at the federal level, finally being implemented in the state of Blagojevich a number of years later. But the thing that you need to understand is that there are now so many ways that seniors can make big mistakes that will impact their ability to get health care in a long-term care facility, even though they were just doing things that families do for each other. And what I'm trying to share with you is that doing things as basic as providing tuition for a granddaughter, or paying money for health needs of an adult child, will often be construed by the state of Illinois as a gift that will later cause you to have a penalty period of ineligibility for long-term care services. Some of my clients, and I came up with this term, and I'm not talking about failure to launch, but when you start to see as many people as I do who are in my age range and up, some of my clients, I call them 83 and never an empty nester. And I call it that because the first time I had someone sitting in front of me who was saying to themselves, we are starting to have our own needs for care, but we still have Jimmy at home. And Jimmy by this time may be 60 or 58 or 62. And I can share with you that just this last summer, a real Jimmy, my cousin Jimmy, who was a person with Down syndrome, and for those of you in the room, he was a Cubs fan. But he lived where all the Cardinal fans are. But anyhow, he was a Cubs fan. And Jimmy passed away at 63. And you see, one of the problems was that Jimmy had been raised in my aunt and uncle's home, but they passed away before he did. And so the big questions become, how do you care for a child who is always going to be a child, who is always going to need parenting, and always going to need supplemental care in addition to what the state can provide? And we call that person a special needs individual. And so we need to do special needs planning to help this family that are going to leave behind a child who can never care for himself or herself. And fortunately, the state law does provide the ability for a person to transfer their assets to a trust for the benefit of that disabled child. When we look at the enormity of the problem facing us as individuals as well as our country and even the world, we have to recognize that within the United States itself, we have enough seniors to basically be the same number of people as in the country of Canada. We have a nation of seniors living within the United States. In 2050, there'll be 78 million seniors. So basically, there's an age tsunami that has come upon us, and with it, some new problems. You know, when I was young, my grandfather died quickly at 60 of a heart attack, and he still was working at Caterpillar Tractor as an engineer in Peoria. When my uncle, his son, got to be about 62, also working at Caterpillar Tractor, not to say that that's a place that's always going to give you a heart attack, but he died over just a couple of days after a massive heart attack. So, you know, I always assumed that I would get to be about this age, and, you know, you die quickly of a heart attack. But the reality is, as we know here in this room, things have changed. They fix our hearts. They put stents in them, and so that allows us to have more productive and capable years, and yet that allows us now to go on to have longevity issues such as aging brain, dementia, Parkinson's, etc. So if you look at this from a societal standpoint, there are lots more of us and lots less of the younger people who are going to pay the bills. And so one of the big problems that comes along is that you go to your attorney and you sit down with your attorney and start to talk about these kinds of issues, and it turns out that your attorney is just like I was 11 years ago, and they're like, I have never really thought about the longevity issues because I just learned to do estate planning. And so pretty much they're just going to give you an estate plan plastered on top of your new problems that you're coming to because you happen to now have a diagnosis of Parkinson's or other things. And so if new questions with old answers often lead to disaster. So where are we today? Well, we've got this new age wave, so it's made Botox one of the most exciting products on the market, gals. And for the guys, of course, they've come out with Viagra. And there's cosmetic surgery. The boomers are lined up outside the doors. And along comes, well, if we're going to live this long, we might as well have a new brand of law called elder law. So today's goal really is to help to recognize the common long-term care opportunities and to avoid common mistakes caused by lack of knowledge of public benefit rules and limitations. The additional goal is to understand what we should be doing with a frail or vulnerable senior who is now moving into the disability community. When you think about being disabled, you go, that's about somebody else. You know, most of us recognize, yeah, we're going to die sometime. We get that. We're willing to accept that we're going to die sometime. But we really don't even want to allow our mind to go to the place where we are alive but disabled. And so, again, what can be done to obtain health care and not go broke? Our law schools typically teach us lawyers to look backwards. We look at old law. I remember being taught about cases in the feudal days. And really, most of the time, we're looking at the concepts of if someone comes to see you, we're looking at death and distribution. But you know, what happens when a person dies and how do we get their stuff to their kids? But you see, today's senior needs disability planning, too. So what is this disability planning? Well, for one thing, it includes powerful powers of attorney, and I'll define that in just a second. You need powerful powers of attorney. You may need gifting, but it has to be consistent with the estate plan goals. For many of you, if many of you would like to stay at home as long as possible, and I find clients coming in to see me now who are saying, you know what, if I'm going to have to pay $17 to $22 an hour for an in-home caregiver, my daughter Julia has been out of work for the last 18 months, I'd like to hire her. Or my son Robert. And so you want to make sure that you have the legal ability to hire a family member to provide care for you if that's what you want to do. Sometimes you need to provide power to create and amend trusts, again, consistent with estate plans. And at all times, we need to protect your distribution wishes. If when you were in your most healthy state, you wanted all three of your children to have the estate divided equally, you certainly don't want those plans modified once you become vulnerable and you are manipulated by someone who's in a power position. And so my concept of powerful powers of attorney, just yesterday I was sitting across the table from my good friends Vic and Ann. And I was doing their estate plan, and they're my age. We graduated from high school together. Vic and Ann are married. Over the last number of years, I've worked with them as they first were caring for Victor's mother at home. Then eventually she went to an assisted living facility, and then after a period of time, passed away. And so now I'm working with my boomer peers, and I'm looking at their powers of attorney, and I'm saying, you all really understand what I'm about to say because you've lived through this. We want to make sure that you have the power in your powers of attorney to take advantage. When I say take advantage, I don't mean take advantage, but to be able to utilize whatever the law does provide people to help to accomplish let's avoid being excessively impoverished, let's make sure that we can access health care, and let's protect the survivor's spouse so they can live in the home. And the standard powers of attorney don't have those provisions in there. If you have a power of attorney, or you look up the Illinois statutory power of attorney, I can guarantee you what it says. Paragraph 1, I designate loved one to make financial decisions for me. Good enough. Then there is a list that the state has provided of what kind of financial decisions you can make. Then there's paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 says, if I want to limit anything in paragraph 1, I put the information in here. Well, I've been practicing law for a long time, and I've never put anything there, and I see lots of other lawyers work, and nobody's ever put anything there, so I just want to let you know, that's a limitation on paragraph 1. Nothing's ever there. Then there's paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 says, are there any other powers that you think you ought to have to really get done what you need to get done in your life? And this, being a tax attorney, I can tell you that once in a while, we see put in paragraph 3 an additional power. Here's the additional power I usually see in paragraph 3. Annual gifting up to the gift tax exclusion, which is currently $13,000, by the way. Gifting up to the gift tax exclusion of $13,000. I rarely, if ever, see anything more there. But in our powers of attorney, or the ones I recommend that you have, there should be a listing of the things that are allowable to do, such as being able to hire a family member to take care of you at home, such as being able to use what's called a pooled trust to be able to put assets to the side that could be used as supplements to your care when and if you would be running out of money otherwise. And there's a variety of other things that could be put in there that the law allows. In fact, you can even encourage a child. Now, the child, we're not talking about a child that is still in diapers or in primary school. We're talking about your kids. And your kids, for most of you looking back at me, are 40 and 50, and for some of you 60. And so we're talking about kids. You know, in my office, the kids are often as old as I am. The kids may well be the right ones to actually move into your house, to care for you. And if they care for you for 2 years in a manner that keeps you from going to a long-term care facility, you can actually transfer the home to them with no penalty by the state of Illinois. That's a big deal. But you can't do it if you don't have the power to do it. And how about this? Louise calls me, am I going to be able to keep my home? Most of you own your homes in joint tenancy if you're still married, or some type of joint relationship. Well, one of you gets sick to the point that you no longer have the mental capacity to make any sort of changes in your estate plan. And you sit down with the attorney and you go, well, George has to go to a nursing home because he had a stroke and he's totally incapable of doing any more decision making. It's $8,000, $9,000 a month. What are we going to do to protect my home? Well, it's joint tenancy. Who owns that house? George and you. A healthy spouse. Well, the state of Illinois allows your house to be an exempt asset to the healthy spouse. But since you only own half, it's really only exempt for half the house. So the attorney says, well, it sure would be great if we could get the other half interest over in your name while he's in the long-term care facility, but it's too bad that he is really unconscious and not able to make decisions. So we'll tell you what, we'll go to court. And we go to court here in DePage, and we say to the judge, please, 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 the law would allow, it really was George's intent to transfer the house to Mary. And we get one judge one day who goes, yeah, that makes sense to me. Let's do it. And then you get a different judge a different day who goes, no, 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 no. There's no authority in their estate plan or their powers of attorney to transfer any houses. I'm not going to allow that. And so if your powerful powers of attorney state that you can do that, hallelujah, you can protect the house for the healthy spouse. So we need powers of attorney that are more than just tax-oriented. More than just tax-oriented. We need to be able to use legitimate powers provided under the Medicaid laws of the state of Illinois to create and fund certain types of irrevocable trusts. We call them a pooled trust. They're run by a charitable organization. A power to transfer real estate to a spouse or a caregiver child. A power to transfer assets to a disabled child. These are things that need to be added because we want these powers to avoid guardianship, and we want to maximize the legitimate powers that are allowed under the law. Because we want to be able to fulfill your desire to protect your spouse. I put here, he wants to protect her, she wants to protect the kids. By the time you get to be my age, you're thinking about your own, I certainly have my own estate plan, and it kind of goes like this. Most of my male clients are like this, gals. We're sitting there and you're talking about inheritance, and, we guys, we kind of go, I don't care about inheritance. I educated those kids. In fact, I got one right now, junior over at Elmhurst College. The other three, we paid for their education. We already took care of those kids. Honey, I just want to take care of you. And she, of course, says, oh, George, we got to take care of the kids. And then we just go, because, we know we're leaving before she leaves anyway, and she'll probably do whatever she wants to do. She'll take care of the kids. Well, let's look at the promise of America. Back in 1965, this is the picture of Lyndon Johnson. And who's sitting next to him? Harry Truman. Because you see, Medicare was really Harry Truman's big thing. And so Truman's sitting there, Humphrey's behind him, Lady Bird's on the other side, and they're signing the Medicare and Medicaid Act. And really, if you read the words that Lyndon Johnson spoke that day, he said this was the solution to avoid the impoverishment of the American senior. And for its time, that was really true. Why was it true? Because in 1965, the most common type of death, these are the top types of death: heart attack, stroke, agricultural accident, industrial accident, cancer. Now here we are years later, and we have the same plan that birthed Medicare to do what? Take care of heart attack, stroke, cancer, accident. Medicare was about providing care that you could get well from. So Medicare cares for you if you can get well. It's a federally paid program through our taxes. Medicare does not care about long-term illness. You still can get your medicines and your doctor visits. There's no Medicare reimbursement code for staying at home and having care come in. Medicare is a social insurance program. Well, what the heck is Medicaid? When we started doing this kind of work 7 years ago, my mother, who's quite a bright lady, said, Rick, what are you talking about? What's Medicaid got to do with seniors? It's about poor people. And I thought it was fascinating that my mother would say that because she lives in Rushville, Illinois, on this cobblestone street. I mean, it really is like brick pavers, old brick pavers. And on that street is my mother and my Aunt Dorothy. And they live 1.5 blocks away. But my mother has been fortunate enough to have heart problems. And Medicare cares about my mother's problems. And 1.5 blocks away is Aunt Dorothy, who has dementia. And Medicare doesn't care about her. It pays for her doctor visits. It pays for her drugs. It pays if she has a UTI, urinary tract infection, and needs to go to the hospital and take care of it. But you see, Aunt Dorothy is she was divorced and she accumulated some assets. And when we did her estate plan a number of years ago, she said, I want every penny spent so I can stay home as long as possible. And for the last few years, we've had caregivers providing care for Aunt Dorothy at home. And I'm willing to bet that when all is said and done, that she will have spent out of her own pocket no more than what the federal government spent on my mother's 4 bypasses, a rehab at home, all kinds of additional costs over the years, pacemaker several years later. But you see, my mother's health needs up to now, and she's now 81, have all been covered by Medicare. Aunt Dorothy, who is not even as old as my mother, for years, she's pretty much been on her own for her health care. And Medicaid will start caring for Aunt Dorothy very shortly now because she's about to get down to $2,000 of assets. And we're going to have to move her to a nursing home in Rushville, Illinois. And she'll have 2,000 or less assets. She will then be limited to her University of Michigan pension, and her Social Security will all be allocated to her care, and she'll be left with $1 a day for personal needs. Now, while our representatives have given themselves many raises since 1965 because they thought inflation was going up, that's one number they haven't changed since 1965, was $1 a day for your personal needs that you get to keep. Because you see, this is a means-tested, meaning how much assets do you have, a needs-based, you have to need care, and it's seen as not an insurance program, but social protection. So in Illinois, Medicaid does cover long-term care, supported living facilities, nursing homes, and to a limited degree, community services, some community services. In Illinois, if you're a married couple, so we'll go back to Bob and Louise, if you're Bob and Louise, and Bob gets Alzheimer's or Parkinson's and needs to go to an assisted living facility and you want to qualify for Medicaid, that's not the ARE, but the AID. If you want to qualify for Medicaid for assisted living care, your home is an exempt asset, 1 car is an exempt asset, and $109,560 is exempt assets. And if you have more than that, you must spend down on care before Medicaid will care about long-term care for the ill spouse. In addition, there's income limits as well. If you're used to having about $4,000 or $5,000 a month from your pension because you're both retired teachers, the healthy spouse will essentially be limited to about $2,739 with excess going toward care. So there's excess assets are applied to care and excess income is applied to care. A single person like Aunt Dorothy, the asset limit is $2,000 and then $1 a day. Any excess assets are spent on care. Now I have this yellow flag being waved here because you see there are penalties that get created where you can be ineligible for care. It's a cold, cruel world, and as of November 1st of this year, the Deficit Reduction Act in Illinois will cause this to be a very cold, cruel world because what's going to happen is anyone who needs to apply for long-term care services to the state of Illinois, there will be an audit of all of your finances for 5 years. 5 years, a 5-year audit. This is something that our office helps families of seniors put together all the documents to go into the 5-year audit because they're going to look back and they're going to question missing cash. Where'd that cash go? They're going to be questioning gifts that you made to family members. And what they do is accumulate what they deem to be gifts. And you have to understand that if you commit a crime, the burden of the proof of proving that you're a bad person is on the state. They have to prove that you're guilty. But when you want the government to write you a check, the burden of proof is on you to prove that you're innocent. So you see, what we're dealing with is we have families with people who have someone with dementia who probably didn't do a great job of taking care of their finances for some period of time. Then you have the state of Illinois going, well, we don't know where all this money is, so we're going to presume that it was given to, guess what, qualify for Medicaid services. Therefore, we're going to create a penalty for gifting. Now, this particular slide, if you could see it really closely, it's one of my favorite slides in what it expresses, because there's not that it squishes this woman. That's not the favorite part there. But there's, because, she's got her shoes hanging out one side and she's hanging out the other. But it says traditional gifting and the Medicaid penalty. And you're thinking to yourself, I talked to my accountant and I asked what would be okay to give to my grandkids or whoever every year, and it used to be $10,000, then it was $11,000. Last year they told me $13,000. So $13,000 a year must be kind of like a safe number to transfer with no penalties. Is that right, Rick? And the answer is, now the tax attorney, Rick, is going to answer. From a tax standpoint, from an income tax and a gift tax standpoint, that is really wonderfully okay. However, if we're dealing with the Medicaid rules, there is no safe harbor of gifting except between spouses. So therefore, even what you consider to be okay under the tax laws is not okay under the Medicaid rules. So the gift tax rules are no safe harbor. And just like Louise, unfortunately for the women in the room, long-term care is usually the woman's nightmare even more than the male. And why would that be? And the answer is this. The reason that's true is that you women are going to care for us for as long as you possibly can as we decline. So when we look at the statistics of the average amount of time in a nursing home, it's 2.5 years. Well, the reason it's 2.5 years is because the women take care of the men at home as long as they possibly can, and so we don't go to the nursing home as soon as, by the way, we usually will die, And now later, when she is going through her declining trajectory, there's not as many resources there to care for her, so she may have to go to a facility sooner, and she often is much more impoverished than she was while he was declining. In addition, I'm going to tell you a story from my own family, and that is 2 years ago my father passed away. And my father, another bright engineer at Caterpillar Tractor, my father retired first from Caterpillar Tractor when he was 55 years old. And he couldn't wait to get out of there, and he rushed down to Florida. Now, by the time my father retired, he was no longer married to my biological mother. He was married to my stepmother. They moved to Florida. She was a little younger than he is. We're not talking way younger, a little younger than he is. They moved to Florida. That's the thing to do. Every year on the anniversary of my father's retirement, for 18 years, this is what he would say to me. I beat him. I beat him. And what he meant was, when he retired from Caterpillar, the average length of time of someone surviving was 18 months. And so once he made it past 18 months, he figured he was beating Caterpillar in the pension game. But you see, 2 years ago, my father passed away. And I mentioned to you that he had married someone who wasn't my mom, so it was my stepmom. I was never part of any of their planning, and this was long before I was even doing this kind of planning. But this is what my stepmother experienced when my father died. First, she learned that Social Security does not have a 2-for-1 special. And my dad and stepmother were living on their 2 Social Security checks. Hers was way smaller than his, $400, $500 a month, and his was $1,200 or $1,300 a month. In addition, my father had a pension from Caterpillar Tractor, but it's what was called a straight life pension. And a straight life pension means it keeps paying as long as you keep living. And as soon as you stop living, there's nothing left for the survivor's spouse. So when my father died, who had been so happy to be beating Caterpillar every year, my stepmother experienced a loss of 1 Social Security check and the entire Caterpillar pension of roughly $1,200. So you see, she went from $1,200 and $1,200, $400 to $1,200. When I work with clients, it amazes me how often I ask them, do you remember what the survivor benefit is of the pension program you have. And everyone always remembers the best. They remember, oh yeah, there's a survivor benefit, but then we have to contact the union or the human resources, and we often find out that that's not the way it is. More often than not, there is a substantial loss of income. So when a client calls us and they have a long-term care crisis, what we want people to understand that it's not too late to do something. Even though there's a 5-year look back, there are things that can be done. And the other day when I was speaking at Pravina Mercy Medical Center, a woman who was in charge of the Alzheimer's program said that right after my presentation they were going to have a support group, and one of the biggest things that they were talking about that day is what to do after the diagnosis. And I said, well, since I'm speaking anyway, I'm going to tell you one of the things you need to do after the diagnosis is you need to call an elder law attorney or an elder care attorney, because it's not too late to do some planning. Because you need to look at whether you should be paying off debt. You should be looking at whether or not you should be buying something that you need. You should be looking at whether or not you need to renovate your home. I put here, you need to be looking at whether or not you need to get married. Now that may seem a little strange to you, but in my office we often have people come in who were married, but they got unmarried, but now in their aging years, they're living together and taking care of each other. And you remember how much we can protect of a person that is single? $2,000 and $1 a day. If they get married, we can protect a house and $109,560. So we've actually had more than one marriage that was inspired by me saying, would you consider getting married? Sometimes it's good to buy better care or to actually work out contractually hiring a family caregiver. Sometimes we want to work to protect the assets that you have for a disabled child or a grandchild. And you know what? Because if you're the spouse, you're going to be living a lot longer. Maybe it's time to buy a new car. Sometimes we work with clients to do what we call a 5-year plan. They have enough assets, we want to make sure we pay for care for 5 years and then protect the excess. Sometimes we have a husband and wife where we want to make sure that if the person is already disabled and we've got them qualified for care in a long-term care facility, if the healthy spouse dies, we want to make sure that the assets of the healthy spouse go on to their children or their charities, whatever it is they're trying to do. Sometimes we actually do hospice planning, where we're called in where a person has been given a very grim diagnosis that they're going to pass away, but they're mentally clear and capable, and we need to work with them to make the best arrangements to fulfill their needs. A perfect example was that where I went to a woman's home, and she's sitting there and she's quite able to communicate with me, but she had a brain tumor and she was going to be passing away within the next unknown amount of time, but they felt within weeks. And she had a daughter who was living in her home, and she wanted that daughter to be able to stay living there, but she knew that the daughter was constantly manipulated by boyfriends and losing all of her money. So we put together a trust for that home that was administered by the capable other children to protect that home for her after she died. Sometimes it's appropriate to apply for a VA benefit that helps you with in-home care. As I mentioned, sometimes it's important to think about marriage, but for seniors, as you're thinking about being married, there may be hidden traps in getting married, because you see, when two seniors are single, they are not responsible for each other's long-term care needs or medical costs. As soon as you get married, when you say I do, you're also saying I will pay for your health care costs. There are often hidden traps in typical estate planning that's been done without thinking about the long-term care problems. We often need to help people to understand how to put together an appropriate special needs trust. And of course, this gentleman knows more about hidden traps probably than any of us. We've got Tiger here. And there's hidden traps often in the wording used in the powers of attorney as well as the trust. These days, I have to recommend to you that you don't do self-help estate plans, because when you try to do your own planning or giving away assets to try to beat Medicaid, it's just not going to work for you. In addition, we have materials that we've given you today about the veterans benefit. Veterans can qualify up to $1,949 for benefits based on certain criteria if they have long-term care costs. And you know, everything that I've mentioned to you today has both a pro and a con. These are general principles. I always say, you know, it's important to talk about these macro ideas, but how it applies to your micro situation is something you have to sit down and talk to an attorney who understands you, the resources available through your family, through your finances, your needs and your abilities and your desires. And there are really many fine attorneys who now work in this particular niche of elder law or elder care. And we have to work with you to understand the risk and reward of making any decision. And we really believe that our job is to provide compassion and care, and so I figured we're kind of like teddy bears, because one of the things I love about my law practice is I get hugged a lot by my clients. And I want to thank you for sharing this time with me today.
I'd like to thank Rick Law. These are tough subjects. Some of us are just entering into the senior arena, and many of you are there now. But these are things that we need to educate ourselves in order to make good decisions, and that's what we're trying to help you with as a commission. What I would like to do is present Mr. Law with a certificate of appreciation from the Elmhurst Senior Citizens Commission for helping us today. So thank you very much. And I'd like to close today, I always like to close with a little thought for the day. If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. So what I'd like you to do today is to go out and enjoy the day, savor the moment. And thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful day.
Hi, I'm Elmhurst Police Chief Steve Neubauer. Elmhurst is a great place to live and work. However, we are not crime-free. Many people in our community become victims of crime simply because they did not lock their belongings. I would ask you to do two things. First, lock your car, house, and bike. Secondly, call 911 to report suspicious activity to the Elmhurst Police Department. The Elmhurst Police Department reminds you to lock it or lose it.